I moved into the apartment a few months after graduating college, trying to save money by sharing rent with someone from Craigslist. The guy's name was Ryan. Seemed normal enough at first. He worked nights at a hardware store and said he mostly kept to himself. But there was something strange about how he always locked his bedroom door, even when he was home. The first week, I brushed it off as just him being private. Some people need space, I told myself. But I couldn't ignore how I'd sometimes hear faint clicking from his door late at night, like he was unlocking and locking it over and over. When I mentioned it, he smiled oddly and said he just liked feeling safe. His smile didn't match his eyes, though. They looked distant. One night I came home around midnight and noticed the living room lights flickering. Ryan's door was cracked open for once. I hesitated, then peeked in. The room was almost empty. Just a mattress, a lamp, and a small desk covered in sticky notes with strange words written in sharp pencil. I didn't have time to read them because his footsteps suddenly echoed down the hall. I quickly backed away, pretending to scroll on my phone when he walked in. He didn't say a word, just stared at me for a second before slowly shutting his door and locking it again. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak from the hallway made me tense up. Around 2 a.m., I heard the sound of his lock clicking again, softer this time, like he was trying not to wake me. The next morning, his door was wide open, and his bed was neatly made. I thought he'd gone to work, but then I saw his shoes by the door. When I knocked softly, there was no response. I glanced inside again. The sticky notes were gone, and his desk was empty. Only his lamp was on, buzzing faintly. I started feeling like I was being watched, even though no one else was there. That evening, when I came home, Ryan was sitting on the couch watching static on the TV. No sound, no channel, just static. I asked if everything was okay, but he just muttered something like, "I sleep better this way." His eyes didn't blink once while he spoke. I went to my room, locked my door, and stayed up most of the night listening. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly, maybe from a noise, maybe from instinct. My room was cold and the hallway light was off, but I could hear slow footsteps, soft and uneven, moving closer to my door. They stopped just outside. My heart was pounding when the doorknob turned once, then again. I didn't breathe. Then silence. After a few minutes, I built the courage to get up and check. I cracked my door open and saw Ryan standing in the hallway facing me. His eyes were open, but his expression was blank, like he was asleep on his feet. I whispered his name, and he tilted his head slowly before turning and walking back toward his room. I stood there frozen, unsure what I'd just seen. But when I finally went to lock my door again, I realized something that made my stomach drop. Ryan's bedroom door was already wide open, and he wasn't inside. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just sleepwalking. People did strange things when they weren't fully conscious. But the more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. Ryan's door was open all day, and he didn't come out once. By afternoon, I finally knocked. No answer. When I pushed the door slightly, I noticed something new. The lamp was gone, and so was the mattress. It looked like he'd stripped the room completely overnight. The only thing left was one of those sticky notes from before, stuck to the wall. It had 2 words written in shaky pencil, "Don't follow." My stomach turned. When he got home later that evening, I asked him where his stuff went. He paused, smiled faintly, and said, "I don't sleep there anymore." He'd started sleeping on the couch after that. I'd wake up and see him lying there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The TV was always on static, no sound. Once I asked him if he was okay, and he replied softly, "She's quieter when I'm out here." I didn't ask who she was. I didn't want to know. Something about the way he said it made me feel like she was standing right behind me. That week, things got worse. I'd find my door unlocked in the morning, even though I double-checked it every night. The dishes I left in the sink would be stacked in strange patterns, forming a circle on the counter. One morning, Ryan wasn't on the couch anymore, but the TV was still on, and there was a cup of coffee waiting on the table with steam still rising from it. I decided to confront him that night. When I came home from work, I found him sitting cross-legged on the floor of his empty room. The door was locked from the inside, but slightly open just enough to see his silhouette. He was facing the wall and whispering something over and over. I couldn't make out the words. I knocked softly and asked if he was okay. He stopped whispering instantly. After what felt like forever, he said in a calm, quiet tone, "She doesn't like you asking." Then he got up and closed the door. I stood there frozen for a while before walking away. That was the first night I decided to sleep with my lights on. The next few nights were restless. I could hear faint tapping coming from his room, always around 3 a.m. It sounded rhythmic, almost like Morse code. Once I tried knocking back and everything went silent. The next morning, my phone alarm didn't go off. The battery had died overnight even though it was plugged in. The final straw came that Thursday. I woke up in the middle of the night again, feeling that heavy, still air that always preceded something off. I turned my head toward the door and saw the faint glow of the hallway light slipping through the crack. I heard footsteps, slower this time. When I called Ryan's name, the footsteps stopped, right outside my door. There was a pause, then a whisper. It sounded like Ryan's voice, but the tone was off, lower, uneven. I froze completely as it said, "She wants to meet you now." My hands shook as I reached for my phone, but before I could even unlock it, the light under my door blinked out. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in bed until sunrise, clutching my phone with every light in the room on. When I finally stepped out, Ryan's door was open again, but his room looked different. There were deep scratches on the wall, like someone had dragged something sharp across the paint. The air smelled faintly burnt, like metal. And on the floor was another sticky note. It read, "She likes you too." That was the morning I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. I started packing right away. Ryan wasn't home, but I didn't care. I wanted out before he returned. Every time I walked past his room, I felt that heavy pressure again, like the air got thicker near the doorway. My hands shook as I tried to tape my boxes, but the sound kept echoing weirdly, like someone was repeating it a few seconds later. By evening, I had most of my stuff by the door. The apartment felt too quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned off the lights in the living room to calm down and caught my reflection in the dark TV screen. There was someone standing behind me, tall, thin, completely still. When I spun around, no one was there. I grabbed my keys and went straight for the door, but it wouldn't open. It wasn't locked. The handle just wouldn't move, like someone was holding it from the other side. My breathing got faster as I pulled harder, but then I heard soft footsteps behind me again. Slow, careful, moving closer. I turned just enough to see Ryan in the hallway, eyes half closed, head tilted. He said, almost in a whisper, "She doesn't want you to leave." His voice cracked on the last word like he was struggling to speak. I didn't say anything. I just backed away until I hit the wall. Then without warning, he walked right past me into his room and shut the door. The lock clicked once, then again, then again. I didn't move until morning. When I finally opened the front door, it swung freely like nothing had been wrong with it. I stepped outside, shaking, and just started walking. I didn't even bring my boxes. I didn't want anything from that apartment. A week later, the landlord called to say Ryan had officially moved out too. He said the place was empty now, except for one thing. When they cleaned the rooms, they found sticky notes covering the inside of my old bedroom door. Every single one said the same 3 words, written over and over in pencil. "You met her. I've never gone back." I moved across the state and changed my number. Still, sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I think I hear that slow, steady sound, the soft click of a lock turning over and over again. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. When my older brother Evan moved out for work, I didn't mind having the apartment to myself for the week. It was a small 2-bedroom place in a quiet suburban complex just outside of Columbus, Ohio. He worked construction jobs out of state sometimes, and it wasn't unusual for me to stay behind. The first night alone, though, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. It started with footsteps. At first, I thought it was from the upstairs neighbor, since you could occasionally hear them pacing around. But these steps sounded too close, right above my ceiling light, slow and deliberate, like someone walking from my brother's room to the living room. I called out his name, forgetting for a second that he was gone, but there was no reply. The sound stopped immediately. I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. I turned up the TV, ate my dinner on the couch, and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that came with being in the apartment alone. Around midnight, I double-checked the locks, turned off the lights, and went to bed. That's when I heard the footsteps again, this time directly outside my bedroom door. I froze in bed, every muscle tight. The footsteps paused right at my door before fading away. I got up, flicked on the hallway light, and checked around. The apartment looked exactly the same. Nothing moved, nothing disturbed. I even opened the front door to peek out into the empty corridor, half expecting to see someone walking away. I texted Evan, half jokingly, asking if he'd set up some kind of prank camera before leaving. He replied a few minutes later saying he was 3 states away and hadn't been home since Sunday. That's when a pit formed in my stomach. I tried laughing it off, but something about the stillness of the apartment after that message felt heavier than before. The next morning, I woke up late for work and felt groggy. My coffee mug was already on the counter though. I didn't remember taking it out. Little things started to feel wrong, like the remote sitting on the opposite side of the couch or my sneakers facing a different direction by the door. I started wondering if maybe someone had a spare key. That night, I tried to catch whatever was happening. I left my phone camera recording on a shelf aimed toward the living room, hoping to prove to myself it was nothing. I turned off the lights, locked every door, and lay down again. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps came back, heavier this time, slower, like whoever it was didn't care if I heard them. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, staring at the faint light from under the door. The steps stopped right outside again, but this time, I heard something else. A faint knock, almost polite, before the sound of slow breathing on the other side. I didn't move an inch. I just waited until the air seemed to go still again. Then, silence. The next morning, I immediately checked the video I'd recorded overnight. My hands were shaking a little as I scrolled through the footage. For the first couple of hours, it was just static darkness, the faint outline of furniture in the glow from a streetlight. But around 2:14 a.m., the frame seemed to move slightly, like the phone had been bumped. Then, a faint shadow passed across the living room. It wasn't distinct enough to see details, but it was human-shaped, tall, and slow-moving. I watched as it stopped near my brother's bedroom door and stood there for several minutes, completely still. My stomach dropped. I replayed it twice, hoping it was a glitch, but the motion was too smooth, too intentional. Someone had been in the apartment. I called the property manager immediately, telling him I suspected someone might have broken in. He came by later that day, checked the locks, the windows, everything, and said there were no signs of forced entry. He even suggested it might be one of the maintenance guys by mistake, but the timestamp was way past midnight. That didn't make sense. That evening, I decided not to sleep in my bedroom. I pulled a blanket to the couch, keeping the TV on low for background noise. I figured the light and sound might keep me calm. Around midnight, I started dozing off, but woke up suddenly to a soft creak from down the hall. My eyes adjusted just enough to see that my brother's bedroom door was slightly open. I knew I had closed that door earlier. Every instinct told me not to get up, but I did anyway, moving slowly across the living room. The air felt heavier the closer I got to that door. I reached out and pushed it shut with the tip of my finger, then backed away toward the couch again. That's when I heard it click open again, like someone inside had pulled it. I backed up fast, heart pounding. I didn't see anyone, but I swore I could feel movement, like air shifting just beyond the doorway. I turned on every light in the apartment, grabbed a kitchen knife, and stood frozen for minutes. Eventually, I went back and checked his room, empty, untouched, the same as before, but the window was slightly cracked open. I slammed it shut, locked it, and barely slept the rest of the night. The next day at work, I couldn't focus on anything. My coworkers joked that I looked like I hadn't slept in days. When I got home that evening, everything looked normal again, until I walked past my brother's door. It was open, even though I'd locked it that morning. I stood there staring at it for a full minute. The air smelled faintly different inside, like old dust or something damp. I started thinking maybe someone had been hiding in the apartment somehow, maybe through the attic access in the closet, but we didn't have an attic. The thought that someone might have been living in here while I was asleep made my chest tighten. That night, I pushed a chair under the doorknob to my bedroom before going to sleep. I turned the phone camera on again, this time pointing at my own door instead of the living room. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd catch whatever it was. Around 3 a.m., the soft creaking returned and the sound of that chair moving. I sat up in bed, gripping the blanket, trying not to breathe. The chair scraped once, then stopped, and then I heard a quiet whisper, so faint I almost thought it came from inside my own head. "Why are you in his room?" I froze the moment I heard that whisper. My phone was still recording, its screen faintly lighting the side of my face. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute, waiting for any other sound. But there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. My heartbeat was so loud it almost drowned out everything else. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that my exhausted mind was playing tricks. The next morning, I didn't check the footage right away. I went to work, distracted and tense, jumping every time my phone buzzed. When I finally got home that night, I sat on my bed and opened the video. The first few hours were silent again, then around 3:02 a.m., the chair under my doorknob shifted slightly. A moment later, a shadow appeared in the narrow strip of light under the door, 2 feet standing motionless. I leaned closer to the screen as the doorknob turned once, twice, softly. Then the voice came again, clearer this time through the microphone. "Why are you here?" I paused the video right there, my whole body covered in chills. I played it again and again, hoping I'd misheard it. But I hadn't. Someone had been right outside my door, talking to me while I slept. That night, I didn't sleep in the apartment. I packed a small bag and went to stay with a friend across town. I told him everything, showed him the footage, and he stared at me like he didn't know whether to believe me or not. He said maybe it was an echo, or maybe my brother had come back early. But I called my brother the next morning. He was still out of state, staying in a hotel for work. He sounded concerned but also confused. "You sure it's not the neighbor's sound carrying through the vents?" he asked. I told him there weren't any vents that connected rooms. That's when he went quiet for a moment before saying, "You should check behind the hallway closet. There's an old crawl space panel in there. I thought it was sealed." My stomach dropped when he said that. When I got back later that afternoon, I opened the closet door. I had to move a pile of boxes to see it, a square panel near the floor, just large enough for a person to squeeze through. I knelt and tapped on it. Hollow. My throat went dry. I used a screwdriver to pry it open slightly, and the smell of damp air hit me like a wave. Inside, there was just darkness, but I could see faint shoe prints in the dust. I didn't look any further. I shut it, nailed it closed, and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the crawl space thoroughly. The officer came back out after a while, saying it looked like someone had been there recently. Old food wrappers, a blanket, a water bottle. Whoever it was, they'd been living inside that wall space, maybe for days. The thought made me feel sick. The cops said they'd increase patrols, but they couldn't stay all night. I moved out the next day, packed everything I could, and left the key on the counter. My brother met me later that week, apologizing like any of it was his fault. But the truth is, I still don't know how long that person had been there, or how many nights I'd been watched while I slept. A few weeks later, I got a text from the property manager saying the new tenant had already complained about hearing footsteps in the hallway at night. I never responded. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and haven't set foot in that building since. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still think I hear that same whisper in the dark. When my best friend Emily and I first moved into our apartment, it felt like the start of real adulthood. We'd saved for months, toured countless places, and finally found this small two-bedroom unit on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. The building was old, the kind with creaky floors and mismatched door handles, but we liked its charm. The first day was spent unpacking boxes, arguing over who got which cabinet, and celebrating with cheap pizza on the floor. We stayed up late talking about how different life would be now. No parents, no curfews, just freedom. When we finally went to bed that night, the place felt peaceful, almost too quiet compared to the noise we were used to from our college dorms. The next morning, I woke up early to sunlight creeping through the blinds. Emily was still asleep, so I made coffee and walked around the apartment barefoot, just taking it all in. It already smelled like us, vanilla candles and laundry detergent. I remember thinking, this place finally feels like home. I didn't know that by the next night, I'd start wishing we'd never signed that lease. The second night started off normal. We made dinner together, watched a show, and talked about work. Emily went to bed early because she had to be up at 6, but I stayed in the living room scrolling through my phone. Around midnight, I got up to get some water from the kitchen. The light above the stove flickered when I turned it on, humming softly. As I leaned against the counter, I heard faint creaking from the hallway, like someone shifting their weight on the old wooden floorboards. I assumed it was Emily getting up for water too, so I called out quietly, "You awake?" There was no answer. The creaking stopped. I shrugged it off and filled my glass, still half distracted by my phone. But then I caught something faint out of the corner of my eye. A shadow moving across the refrigerator door's reflection. It passed slowly, like someone had walked behind me. I turned around instantly, expecting Emily to be standing there, but the hallway was empty. The only sound was the faint buzz of the refrigerator motor. Trying not to freak myself out, I whispered, "Em," and peeked down the hallway. Her bedroom door was closed and the light underneath was off. Still, I went to check. I turned the knob gently and pushed it open a few inches. She was sound asleep, curled under her blanket. Her phone was charging on the nightstand. I backed out quietly, closing the door again. My heart was pounding harder than it should have been. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings make sounds, and my brain was probably on edge from the move. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, but it took me a long time to fall asleep. What I didn't know was that Emily had heard me talking in the kitchen that night, except I hadn't said a word after calling her name. The next morning, Emily looked exhausted. She was pouring coffee with her hair still tangled from sleep when she asked, "Who were you talking to last night?" I froze mid-bite of toast. "What do you mean?" I asked. She gave me this confused look and said, "You were in the kitchen talking to someone around midnight. I thought you had someone over." My stomach tightened instantly. I told her I hadn't spoken to anyone, that I was alone the entire time. But she looked skeptical, like she wasn't sure if I was joking. She said she heard my voice clearly, even laughter, followed by a second, quieter voice that didn't sound like mine. I tried to laugh it off, but the thought of her hearing a second voice in our apartment unsettled me more than I let on. We both brushed it off as maybe her half-dreaming or hearing the neighbors through the thin walls. The building was old and the units were close together, so it was a believable excuse. Still, that night, I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. The more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Our nearest neighbor's kitchen was on the opposite side of the building. That night, I went to bed earlier than usual, leaving a small lamp on beside me. I scrolled my phone until my eyelids got heavy, trying to keep my mind off the night before. Sometime around 1 a.m., I woke up to faint shuffling sounds from the living room. It wasn't loud, just soft movements, like fabric brushing against furniture. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped, then started again, a few steps this time. I got up slowly, careful not to make the floorboards creak, and cracked my door open. The light from the street lamp outside spilled faintly into the living room, and I saw a figure standing near the kitchen island. It looked like Emily, same height, same hair, but she wasn't moving. My first instinct was relief, thinking maybe she couldn't sleep either. I stepped out quietly and whispered, "Em, you good?" The figure turned slightly, just enough for me to notice her eyes were wide open, but she wasn't really looking at me. She just stared past me like she was focused on something over my shoulder. Before I could say anything else, she walked right past me toward her room, never blinking, never saying a word. The sound of her door clicking shut echoed in the still apartment. I stood there frozen for a few seconds before finally heading back to bed, my heart racing. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning when she came out for breakfast, she acted completely normal, smiling, asking about my plans for the day. I asked her if she'd been up last night, and she looked genuinely confused. "No, why?" she said. I told her I'd seen her in the kitchen around 1 a.m., and her expression changed instantly. "I didn't leave my room," she said slowly. "I woke up once around then, but I stayed in bed." I wanted to tell her what I saw, but the way she looked at me, half worried, half terrified, made me stop. That's when I realized one of us was starting to see something the other couldn't explain. That night, I decided I'd stay awake just to see if anything happened again. I didn't tell Emily this time. Around midnight, I sat in the dark with a blanket wrapped around me, facing the kitchen. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that starts to feel heavy after a while. And then, right on cue, I heard whispering again, from the same place I'd stood that first night. It was my voice, and someone else's. I couldn't move at first. I just sat there on the couch, frozen, listening to the sound of my own voice whispering in the dark. The tone was casual, like a conversation with someone I knew. Then came a second voice, quieter, softer, but undeniably there. I leaned forward slowly, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the words. It was coming from the kitchen again. I stood up, gripping the edge of the couch for balance. The air felt colder the closer I got, like the temperature dropped in that one corner of the apartment. I peeked around the doorway. The kitchen was dim, only the faint light from the window outlining the counters. But there was movement, a shadow shifting near the sink, too tall to be my reflection. I whispered, "Emily?" But there was no answer. The whispering stopped instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. I reached for the light switch, but before I could touch it, the refrigerator door creaked open a few inches. That sound, slow, dragging, like someone testing how quiet they could be, sent chills all over my body. I turned on the light, flooding the room in harsh yellow. Nothing. The fridge door was open, but no one was there. I shut it quickly, heart hammering, and checked the hallway. Empty. I went to Emily's room, and she was fast asleep again, breathing evenly. I almost woke her up, but something inside told me not to. Instead, I closed her door gently and went back to the living room. I sat there until dawn, every creak of the floor making me flinch. When Emily woke up later, she immediately noticed how pale I looked. "You didn't sleep again, did you?" she asked. I told her what I'd heard, what I'd seen. She went quiet, then said something that made my blood run cold. "That's exactly what I dreamed last night, you talking to someone in the kitchen." I stared at her, unsure how to respond. She said she couldn't make out who the other person was in her dream, only that it was a woman standing near the refrigerator, whispering something back to me. I didn't know what to say. We both laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but deep down, I could tell she believed me now. That night, we agreed to sleep in the same room. We pushed her bed closer to the door and left the hallway light on. For the first few hours, it was silent. I almost convinced myself it was all over, until around 3 a.m., when we both heard it. The same faint whispering from the kitchen, our voices overlapping like an echo from another night. Emily sat up and whispered, "Please tell me that's the neighbors." I couldn't answer. We stared at the open bedroom door until the sound stopped. Neither of us moved. Then from the kitchen, the refrigerator door creaked open again, slow and steady, like it knew we were listening. We moved out 2 days later, leaving most of our stuff behind. The landlord said the previous tenants had also complained about voices in the kitchen, but no one had stayed long enough to figure out why. Emily and I never talked about it again after that, but sometimes when I visit her new place, she'll glance toward the kitchen mid-conversation, as if she's still listening for something. I try to laugh it off, but every now and then, late at night, I'll be alone making coffee, and I'll hear my own voice whispering from somewhere behind me.